350 million years ago, the land of the Appalachian Plateau was home to a lush biosphere. Compressed and sequestered between sedimentary layers over millions of years, these remains became an extremely rich reserve of coal. Combined with oil and gas, these hydrocarbons defined much of the watershed's anthropogenic experience. The first coal mine of the Allegheny Valley, and indeed all of Pennsylvania, began operation in 1769 on Coal Hill in what is now downtown Pittsburgh. As the scale of use expanded in the coming decades, more mines were established in the lower watershed. Coal was transported via barge down the river to fuel the rapidly growing Pittsburgh. Ordinary barges carried from 600 to 1,000 tons with a draft of 6 to 9 feet. This coal was then floated or towed down the river and unloaded directly at manufacturing plants, also located on the river. That said, the vast majority of coal flowing into Pennsylvania wasn't mined in the Allegheny watershed. The Monongahela's rich West Virginia coal veins ultimately proved far more productive. By the mid-1800s, demand from the wider Mississippi Basin led most of the region's coal to continue beyond Pittsburgh down the Ohio. In 1844, coal shipments from Pittsburgh totaled 2.5 million bushels. By 1866, it was 40 million. Readily accessible coal also fueled the competition to river-borne commerce, the railroad. By 1870, railroads had grown to cover the entire watershed, often following rivers on their paths. With their high speed and interconnectivity, railroads quickly became the primary carrier of passenger traffic, along with smaller finished goods, particularly between areas without direct river access. The growth of the rail network also added new obstructions to the river in the form of low bridges at points of already narrow spans. These bridges limited traffic based on the height of the boat and seasonal level of the water. That said, if you were on the water, and especially if you were shipping in bulk, not even the most efficient freight train could beat towing a barge down the Allegheny. For this reason, coal remained a prominent commodity on the Allegheny headed into Pittsburgh, and the dominant commodity headed out of it. This supremacy began to waver in the 1900s, when new coal mines in western Kentucky and Alabama provided a local source of fuel to the lower Mississippi, disrupting a key market for western Pennsylvania's coke. At the height of King Coal, the watershed also served as the backdrop to the dramatic rise and fall of another fuel, natural gas. In 1868, Atlantic Monthly columnist James Parton compared Pittsburgh's industrial landscape to, quote, hell with the lid taken off. Choked with smog and soot, the city's ravenous appetite for coal, from steamboats to streetlights, made its air one of the worst polluted in the country. 2 decades later, however, the number of smoky days had declined sharply. Harper's Weekly observed that, quote, a peaceful revolution had taken place in the city. The secret behind this transformation? An 1880s boom in natural gas. In the mid to late 1870s, oil prospectors found substantial gas supplies in Butler, Armstrong, and Clarion counties. While striking gas wasn't uncommon for oil drillers, instead of burning off a flare, a pair of local iron manufacturers opted to use the gas to heat their furnaces. A network of pipelines began spreading across western Pennsylvania as households, industrialists, and city officials all found gas preferable to coal. Pittsburgh streetlights, lit with coal gas starting in 1837, transitioned to natural gas once the 1880s rolled around and pipelines entered the city proper. By 1888, a single gas provider, Westinghouse's Philadelphia Company, single-handedly supplied gas to 700 mills, factories, and other businesses, along with 25,000 homes in the city. Supply, however, could not meet demand. With easily accessible gas depleting and subjecting customers to substantial market fluctuation by 1890, many industrial users, including the influential Carnegie Steel Works, retooled their plants to run on coal. Smoky skies were a figment of the past no more. Even as coal returned to primacy, the effects of the gas boom were clearly marked on the watershed. In the 1890 case, Nanny R. Collins versus Chartier Valley Gas Company, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court affirmed damages to the gas company for saltwater contamination of a private drinking water well. The opinion noted that, quote, when the salt water is allowed to mingle with the fresh, it will spoil the whole neighborhood. In a future example, from 1906, the Department of Health investigated the claim from the Clarion Water Company that natural gas and oil wells in the watershed had polluted local drinking water. The Department of Health agreed, declaring the water supply as, quote, prejudicial to the public health. To address well source pollution and saltwater infiltration, state and federal legislatures repeatedly attempted to regulate drilling practices. Laws passed in 1885, 1891, and 1921 mandated that unused and unfinished wells be capped off, though these laws remained poorly enforced until the 1940s. Perhaps the most significant mineral resource of the region was not a gas, but from a dark brown sludge. Now the largest crude oil producer in the world, the United States oil industry began with its first commercial well in 1859 near Titusville, Pennsylvania. Situated in the upper reaches of the Allegheny watershed, the stream later known as Oil Creek became the center of the nation's first petroleum boom. The region's geology positions the watershed with both plentiful and accessible crude oil. Located between layers of limestone and Marcellus shale, the folded landscape kept the remnants of the Devonian era near the surface and easily able to seep upwards. While indigenous communities had been harvesting from these seeps long before American industrialists rolled in, as kerosene began supplanting whale oil as the lighting fuel of choice and industrial lubrication needs expanded, extraction increased exponentially. By 1861, the Oil Creek corridor was producing as many as 20,000 barrels of oil per day. Without well-developed railroad or pipeline networks, barrels were floated down the river on barges towards refineries downstream. Private capital and working folk alike took notice. In just 6 years, the population of Titusville had grown from 250 to over 10,000. Similar transformations in communities of Pit Hole, Cherry Run, Pleasantville, and countless others industrialized the upper Allegheny watershed as never before. Indeed, the conspicuously named Oil City and Petroleum Center were planted by the same companies that sunk the wells that supplied them. By 1863, the rapid production increase had tanked domestic oil prices and led to a notable slowdown. Very few of these original operations proved profitable. Long-term prospects for the industry, however, remained strong. In the winter of 1867, the Allegheny Valley Railroad linked Oil City directly with Pittsburgh. Bolstered by strong foreign prices and more experienced operators, the industry solidified itself and continued to spread across western Pennsylvania, though the cycle of boom and bust would continue over the coming decades. This reckless expansion brought with it notable environmental impacts. In addition to many of the same well issues as gas extraction, oil brings another hazard: spills. In May of 1864, several boats laden with petroleum got jammed under a bridge at Oil City. The crash spilled over 25,000 barrels into the Allegheny River. Just by scraping oil off the water's surface, dippers could, quite profitably, harvest 50 to 100 barrels a day in the week to follow. This was so common, there was an entire secondary industry harvesting oil slicks from the river. While, like gas, subsequent decades saw oil extraction grow less overtly destructive to the immediate environment, the cumulative impact was immense. Production expanded to Hickory Island, Sugar Creek, Reno, Sandy Creek, Tionesta, Tidiote, and Emlenton. Most of the drilling happened on land that had once been used for agriculture. Records of the day refer to the farms that produced the oil and the families, later companies, that owned them. Within 2 decades, one company would come to consolidate nearly all of them: Standard Oil. As wells sunk into the ground, Pennsylvania production grew to a peak of 30 million barrels of oil per year, over half the entire U.S. production. While the state would rapidly decline from its peak, it succeeded in kickstarting potentially the most influential domestic industry in U.S. history. Which now brings me to steel. This video is already way too long, but I know folks are going to complain that in this entire discussion of industrial expansion along the Allegheny River, steel hasn't been mentioned yet. So yeah, steel is important, super important. Like, Pittsburgh's nickname is Steel City, its biggest sports team is the Steelers, and nearly everything in the city is named after Carnegie, Frick, or Mellon. The collapse of the steel industry in the mid-late 20th century destroyed tens of thousands of livelihoods and caused a significant contraction in many communities. In their wake, remaining runoff and slag from steel mills has proved incredibly harmful to human and environmental health. I chose instead to focus on hydrocarbons for 3 reasons. 1. They were more geographically contingent and distributed across the watershed. 2. They represent what I believe to be an even more transformative industrial shift. And 3. Everybody already talks about steel. I wanted to do something else. So that's all you're going to get from me. Let's try to start wrapping this up.